Hey everyone, welcome back to Talking Cardboard. On this episode, we're going to review the brand new game called Ark Nova. Thank you for joining us with this new review. As always, I'm Jerch. We've got John to my right, Corey to my left. So Corey, how did you hear about this brand new and hot off the presses game, Ark Nova?
It's been on the BoardGameGeek.com hot list for a while now. Even before it came out, it was generating a lot of buzz. I know some reviewers got their hands on it early, played it, reviewed it, and just loved it. It made a lot of people's top game of all time, top 10 list for sure. I think that generated a lot of buzz. And it's got kind of a unique theme to it too, that you don't see very often with the zoo building theme. So I think that caught a lot of people's attention.
Yeah, and it's obviously, as you all can see here, it's got a lot of table presence. It's got cards. It's got worker placement, a lot going on. John, can you run down just the basic elements of Ark Nova?
Yeah, overall, it's not that difficult a game, even though it kind of does look like a lot out on the table here. But realistically, on your turn, you have 5 actions you can take, depending where on this tableau they fall. And as you take an action, it actually rotates the card and changes the power of each action. And really all you do is you're building out enclosures, kiosks, pavilions for your park and placing these tiles onto your board to fill it up and maybe get other bonuses. You're taking an action on the association board, which is like gaining sponsorships with different parts of the world, or gaining research tokens, or completing conservation acts. You draw cards, simple. One action is playing animals. If you get it up to the 5 spot, you actually get to slap down 2 animals, so that's pretty neat. And then you have your sponsors action, which is playing a certain set of cards that give you special abilities that carry out through the game. The unique thing to this game is you're gaining tickets or appeal to your park, and you are also contributing to conservation acts, which then get you conservation points. And to end the game, those tokens need to overlap and run past each other, and you score points based on how far you get those past each other.
So unlike in Ghostbusters, the 1980s movie, you do want to cross the streams here, that you are working tokens from both sides of the board until they cross, and then that triggers the end game, which is a pretty unique element. I don't know if we have anything else that plays like that.
There's a couple games like Rajas of the Ganges, which is a dice placement game, but there's not a whole lot of games out there that do that. But what also makes that unique about it is that people can end the game with a negative score. So I think that's kind of...
And they quite often do.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually where I've ended up, but it's kind of neat to see where you're just trying to get to the positive side of the point scoring, and that's very unique in a board game.
Yeah, and especially once you get to that end game as well, is we're all kind of a rat race for those little points that don't seem like a lot.
Yeah.
But then at the end, being able to jump up the conservation board
really matter a lot.
Really pays off.
Point, yep.
Yeah, so let's just jump into kind of some of our favorite mechanics of this game. So Corey, what drew you to Ark Nova, and what have you really enjoyed about it?
Beating a dead horse with this, I say it in almost every review, but I really like mechanisms in a game. The main mechanism with the conveyor belt of cards at the bottom and how each card has a different power associated with whatever column it's in is what drew me to the game originally, and also what made me really enjoy this game ultimately in the end. I just love the fact that you are messing with your own little card puzzle at the bottom of your own player board, all in the while doing some of the other main actions. It's got your tile placement, which is fun. It's got hand management, which is really neat, and some of those other things. But really, I'm just drawn to how the bottom mechanisms for the cards work.
Yeah, and you touch on that. I think that hits on a lot of our buzz phrases too, because I know, not to speak for you, but you really like tile placement. I really like hand management and Euro style, and it has just enough of each of these elements that work well together without any of them dominating and kind of minimizing the other ones that are going on. So it's got a really good balance of all of those elements. John, what do you think are some of your favorite parts of this game?
Like you said, obviously tile placement is awesome. I mean, it's not super in-depth like other games. Really, you're just looking at how best do I fit in the different size enclosures and kind of fill the board up with like kiosks or pavilions. But there are bonuses on the board that you're trying to shoot for, and you have to build off previous tiles you've played. I know for sure with the tiles, I've always unlocked my build 2 action just so I could cover up those spots and not have to think too hard about trying to manipulate around that. So that's a good little thing. But for me, actually, in this game, the tile placement doesn't take precedence. I really like trying to figure out how to make the animal and sponsorship cards combo, and then how do you take that and then apply it to the conservation axe where you can actually score points. That's probably my favorite part. And there are a lot of cards in this deck, and
they're all unique.
Yeah, they're all unique. It's a little overwhelming, but it seems like in general there hasn't been an unbalance of the type of cards. You're
agree.
always seeing the different, like there's reptiles, birds, predator cards, and it seems like the deck is varied enough that those all show up randomly,
The
and not
percentages
just
are way down.
right. And you're not just seeing like on accident like all reptiles, which would kind of defeat some of the strategies that people make.
And there are so many lines of attack or success in this.
Yep.
With the cards, the starting cards that you're dealt, you can figure any sponsorships that are going to line up, any conservation strategies, any combos, and there's so many that it's not overwhelming, which I usually, in heavier games, I say that I tend to get overwhelmed. I don't feel overwhelmed in this. You just need to figure out what your starting lines are going to be and then go from there. And as opposed to a game, say, like Wingspan, where it seems like with your cards, there's a lot of combos or lanes that you could figure out. In Wingspan, there's not a whole lot of ways to interact with each other. In this game, there still is. When you've got all the different tracks that you're jockeying for, whether it's the lines of the conservation that you're trying to maximize and kind of box each other out, there is still...
Or what research search or continent sponsorship you're trying to gain.
Fight for the higher point ones.
Or the conservation axe.
There is still plenty of interaction with players. Or trying to figure out, okay, what type of animals are you kind of looking for when it's the main board, that the shared community cards.
Oh gosh, yeah, and you're just staring at a card and you're like, please, someone don't take that.
Yep.
It's like,
and you've got opportunities to either get it, or especially early in the game, have to have patience and wait for that card to fall down the line.
This is something Corey probably likes, but there is some push your luck as you're waiting for your cards to build up in power, where you probably could get that card you want right now, but it's like, but if I wait and let that card get up to a 5, now I can do that and this.
Right.
So
and I think that mechanism for what you can do on your turn is also a really high selling point, because there are 5 different actions. And
Everybody's
then
got the same 5.
Yep, and then you're kind of crafting when you want to start to kind of slowly build them up, but then also when you can power up the card and flip it over to its slightly more powerful side. And I think the best part about this is you can't do it for every card.
Yes.
The way that the game is structured is you can only be flipping over at most 4 out of your 5 cards.
Yep.
And then it never feels like, okay, we've all plateaued to the next level of the game. No, you have to make choices. And in the last game we played, I think I lost because I only flipped over 3 instead of 4.
I think everyone actually only did 3, because there is another choice you have to make right away. Is either you're gaining another guy for your board of directors, an associate, or you can upgrade a card. And I think for some reason we're all focused on we needed associates to send more guys up there when we do the association action. And I don't know if that helped or hurt people, but not having another car upgraded, that you can definitely feel that.
Well, I think that's kind of the worker placement mindset we have, is that we're thinking we want more workers, we only get 1, but having your worker only contributes to 1 out of the 5 things that you're doing. So it is very balanced, a lot of push-pull. It is kind of push your luck with a lot of this, and you're crafting your way through this game.
Yep. And my excuse for the reason why I do poorly in this game is I think it's... So I initially, this game looks like more of a strategy game, but I think it's really a tactical game disguised as a strategy game. And what I mean by that, too, is, like you said, a lot of us have been going after like the boardroom members or the associates more than upgrading the cards and that sort of thing. I think, like, for example, in this game that I had set up down there, I only upgraded 2 of my cards because I was going heavy on the associates right away, because in my mind I wanted to formulate a strategy where, oh, hey, in the boardroom up here, if I need to double up on the same action within the same round, I'm going to need at least 3 of those workers to do that, because it costs more to do the same action within the same round. And I had my mind set on that from the start, but then as soon as I got into getting more associates, for the boardroom, I found myself not needing to double up on the action as much, and I kind of pivoted a little bit, but by then I had already unlocked my associates and not flipping over another card. And you have to, I think, be a little bit more diversified, a little bit more balanced in your strategy in the beginning of the game to be able to pivot tactically with what cards come up. And I think that's where I falter a little bit.
But it's not like you are hamstringing yourself so much that you are able to come back or make pivots and adjustments. But you don't realize it until the end of the game. Like, oh man, I kind of took a suboptimal line.
And
here.
I'm not painting that as a negative. I think that's a pro of the game. It's just something you need to realize getting into it. Another big pro of the game for me, I'm not a huge theme person. I don't really care about thematic games. But with this, not necessarily the theme itself, building a zoo, I could care one way or the other less about it. I think the way that the theme integrates into the gameplay is what I really enjoy about it. You can go after these conservation projects, which is very thematic. You can release animals to the wild, back to the wild, and get conservation points for that, which is really thematic and cool. You're literally discarding a card of an animal that you had put into your zoo and maybe have held on to for a large majority of the game that, hey buddy, you're going back to the wild, I'm getting some conservation for it. It just plays in so well to what you're doing with this game.
Well, because that it's a balance between conservation, which is then reducing the appeal of your park, or then getting more animals into it, which is going to drive more people there. But you need both of those components in order to trigger the end game and actually succeed in this. And I think it's really cool to find that balance, because sometimes the balance is much more on the conservative side of the board, or it could be more towards the middle. I don't think we've ever had it where it's been on the ticket or interest side of the board yet. But I mean, it's very possible if somebody's kind of speed rushing their way through, or they've got a really good theme of animals going up and they've got a really good engine working, that it's very possible to have such a very diverse experience with this.
Yep. And I love everything, about like the boardroom that we were talking about too, with getting some partnerships with different regions of the world to get you discounts on certain animals, or to get you the icons needed to then play particular type. I mean, everything just works so smoothly in this.
It is perfectly integrated. And like you mentioned, the board, so for all of the parks, all the boards are different in terms of the layout, in terms of the rewards you get for covering up certain spaces. And I think it changes your game. I don't know if there's been any board so far that we felt hamstrung by, or any board that has given you too much of an advantage, because each one comes with a little power. But it's just enough where you have to put that into your calculation for how you want your strategy to go. You
should mention, though, too, that the flip sides of the boards are all the same if you did want to play the vanilla game.
Yeah, if you wanted to play a more kind of streamlined, even keel game, that is an option for you as well. But then you can have these different boards that it's not necessarily you're playing a different character. Dune Imperium comes to mind, where if you're a different leader, your game is totally different from somebody else's. But or in Root, where it's asymmetrical. But here's just enough where you have to think about your strategy a little bit and how do these things work together, and you can pretty much find a way where they do, to some extent, kind of combo together. John, are there any other pros that we haven't mentioned yet you want to talk about?
Just one thing with the cards. They do a good job kind of keeping things simple. The animals, for example, have these special abilities, and they might be stronger or weaker on certain animals, but the phrasing they use for the action it creates when you play it is straightforward and the same. And how they show how you gain tickets or knowledge or points is laid out very nicely on the card. The sponsorship cards as well are also laid out really straightforward. It's basically, here's the title of the sponsorship, here's what it does, and it's color-coded to immediate actions or endgame scoring or income round effects. So it's all laid out very straightforward. Maybe there's a little thinking with how the action exactly works, but overall they're pretty straightforward and easy to follow along with.
Yeah, and you're somebody that typically goes that route, trying to acquire the different sponsorships, because those combo, they unlock new kind of ways that you can be constructing your park, and they definitely have endgame scoring much more than the animals.
Right.
I think you've taken advantage of that.
The hardest part about it is, if you do start playing a lot of those sponsorships, is remembering what triggers and when.
Yep.
Especially if there's effects that when other opponents play something, it still triggers your sponsorship, and it's so hard to keep track of that once you start getting enveloped into the game. It's just like a secondary thing that you've played and forgotten about, but very powerful effects that you need to keep in mind.
Yeah, but just one example that I think came up last game is I had a polar bear enclosure. So anytime anybody else played bears, I got 2 tickets. And then I didn't register that you played red pandas, I think.
Yep.
And that was technically counting as a bear. Forgot about it, but then you're just, when I saw it, give me the 2 tickets to kind of rectify that a little bit. But there are a lot of ways that there is cross-player interaction as well. Anything I'm missing for pros, or do we want to move on to cons?
I just wanted to mention though too that some of the cards have keywords on them that at a glance, if you've played the game for a while, you would know what that keyword means. But also they have a description of what the keyword means right underneath it on the card. So every card is described very well on what it exactly does. So.
Yeah, it's very well laid out. It's very good to bring in new players or players who are unfamiliar with games. And even though there is a huge table presence, once you break it down, it is very approachable for new players like your brother who just jumped in this time, and he did well. It took him a turn or two to kind of catch his breath, but after that he was right immersed in it and kept up with us the whole time.
Right.
So let's transition to cons, and John, I'll let you go first because you're typically a negative person. Do you have any con that kind of jumps out with this game?
Yeah, there's 2 things I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, I asked for one.
Yeah, there's 2 things I can think of right off the top of my head, and one, it's a long game. If you have issues playing long games, this isn't going to be for you. I don't typically mind it. I actually think it makes sense with what you're trying to do here. You're taking a zoo, essentially, and building it from the ground up. And it does, pick up pace as you get your engine running. And that's probably pretty typical of these type of games. The other con, and, we've only played with the competitive animal abilities once, but we didn't see those very often this last game, and I would have liked to see how the poison and the constricting and the pilfering and all that kind of interacts with everyone, and that just really hasn't been a thing yet. So
my monkey stole a card, and that's all that happened in this last game.
But I had this thing, this sponsorship that was like genetic research or quarantine zone, and no one could affect me with negative abilities, but then we saw no negative abilities, so it's like, was that card worth my time and effort?
Because that took a while to formulate for you.
And maybe we just missed out of them in the deck because the deck is huge, which is probably both a pro and con, but it would have been nice to see that play out a little more in the games we've played so far.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, look at that deck. This was a 4-player game, played all the way through, and there's still like a good half of the deck left.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's pretty neat.
So the replayability is incredible with it too, and you don't get tired seeing the animals again. But I think that kind of brings into some of my cons too, is because there are so many cards to go through in the deck, it is hard to experience all of it. Because I know we've played a couple of games and there's this petting zoo combination that we haven't come across yet. I mean, we see some of the cards, but it's too late in the game to get started, or if you're trying to get more specialty zones for animals, sometimes it's hard to get those early enough where it'll pay off. So that's kind of been my first big con with this, is there's so many cards, so many different ways that it can go, that a lot of times you are, just by the law of averages, missing out on the opportunities to start to build these combinations. But I don't think it takes away from the game at all. It's just you see all these cute little animals like the alpaca and there's a pig and a guinea pig and stuff like that. And like, well, I want to have those in my park, but at this point in the game, it's not feasible.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of my first really big con in this game, is that there's so many cards in the deck, and God forbid, Corey, you'd have to sleeve them all. It'd make it twice as high.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a problem with the game. It just means that you're missing out on some of those combinations.
Yeah, and my biggest thing is the length of the game too, but it's kind of a weird relationship the way I look at it, because I feel like for the first 2 hours, 2.5 hours of the gameplay, it flies by. You don't really feel like you've been playing a game for 2 hours or 2.5 at that point. But that last little half an hour is kind of more of a slog. So, hopefully that's, mitigated with maybe an expansion in the future. But other than the length of the game and maybe some of the luck, which is getting into more of the tactical card play, not as much of the strategy, with those 2 minor things, I don't really see too much else wrong with the game.
Well, and I think part of what has led to the length for the way that we've been playing is we're exploring.
Yeah.
Like this whole time, we're reading the cards, we're figuring out, there are other cards that are going to be comboing with this and there, trying to run through different conservation strategies, things like that. We're really diving in and exploring this almost like a sandbox style. And it's not that type of game at all, but it really lends itself to being able to explore and figure out how these hexagonal tiles are going to fit into your board. And so I bet if we were spending less time exploring, the game would go a little bit faster. But like you said, for the biggest part of it, it doesn't seem like it's taking too long. It's just you're exploring, getting into it, and that end can really bum rush. You can go real fast through the end to try to catch everybody off guard and then be the one person across the two tokens to finish with positive points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and end game scoring is very crucial in this game too, more so than some other games.
Oh, for sure.
So
Yep.
You have to keep that in mind.
Yep, because I know this last game that we just played, end game scoring was what won you the game, and not just won it close. Like you ended up winning by 9 points, and you were losing going into end game scoring.
And one other potential negative, it's just a minor thing, and depends on how you receive this information here. But it's not a tile laying game. It's not a polyomino game, really. I mean, it has its value, it has its place for the game. But if you're somebody who's just in love with tile laying, love with polyominoes, this is not that type of game. It's more just a card game. So it has its place, but that could be a negative for some if you're coming into it like, oh, I wonder what type of park I'm going to build based on where they're going to be at my board. It's not really as much.
Well, it isn't inconsequential though, because with the way that the obstructions are and the different spots that you get your bonuses and the different shapes of the enclosures, like that does matter. That spatial reasoning, that tile situating, it does matter, and it does play into how well you can execute your strategy in it.
For me, it hasn't felt like it's mattered as much as it could.
Because you don't build anything.
I don't really build much out, as you can see.
I have a perfect little
I think it comes more into play with, okay, so throughout the game, you can kind of do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. Oh, hey, I need to build an enclosure next to water. I can easily do it. Next to rocks, sure, fine. Next to a border, yep, easy to do. It comes into more play where, can I squeak out that last tile to fill out my entire board type of deal, which I have never really gone after. I just don't feel like, I really need to squeeze in this particular kind of enclosure for this exact animal, and shoot, I can't do it because I boxed myself out.
Yeah.
I think with the tile laying, you can kind of do whatever you want to do for most of the time.
Okay.
But yeah, that's it. I mean, it's not a negative. I just wanted to mention it could be a little different than what some people might think getting into it.
So, John, is the tile aspect of this, does this scratch an itch for you, or is it kind of more of along what Corey's saying, where it's kind of a take it or leave it?
No, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I mean, it's decent tile placement. It's definitely not, queen domino level type tile placement, but there is some thought that needs to go into it, but it's more of a side thing than the main aspect of the game. It's really, you're trying to make your card and engine work, and the tile placement's kind of just a supplementary thing to make sure that you can play the animals you want, and there's some bonuses on the board that you can get. So
very cool, don't get me wrong. It's just not going to really play into the strategy as much as you might think.
So speaking of strategy, how easy do you think it's been to come up with your own strategies or feel like you are taking this game into your hands so far? John, what do you think?
I will say in every game I've played, I felt like right off the bat, I had no viable strategy going forward, and it was not going to end well. And then I think all the games I was right at the front somehow. Like, you eventually start seeing more and more cards, and as that happens, you have options you can make, and maybe you had to transition a little bit at the beginning from what you thought what you were going to do to now this is my plan of action. And fortunately, this game seems to lend itself to that, where you can make a pivot in that first third of the game and still do well. So
is that a positive or a negative thing in your mind?
I think it's a positive.
Okay.
I mean, I think a good game player, should be able to maybe come into a game with that drafted cards and be like, I know exactly what I'm going to do. But if it doesn't work out, a good player should be able to figure out how to pivot and make something work. And I think that's part of this game, is you're not always going to have what's available for the zoo that you want, but here is what's available, and now make it work.
Yeah.
And I have a tough time imagining that. And I mean, you guys can attest to it. Most of the games that we play, I do not very well in. I don't win very, very many games, so I'm not necessarily a great game player. But I have noticed that with the drafted cards in the beginning of the game, I try to formulate a strategy. Okay, this is definitely what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to go after. Let's just dig into it and go for it. And I come off to an early lead. I just pop out front, and then as soon as I start drawing cards that aren't quite in my favor, I don't snap into the correct cards that I'm looking for. You guys are starting to do more of that, and I'm not. Then I start falling behind, and I'm not as great at pivoting. Like I said, not a great board gamer player. But I do find that the strategy tendencies in my head go against the tactical nature of way of thinking that you need in this game.
So then, again, I pose the same question to you. Do you feel like that's a negative aspect of this? Do you feel like it's taking away from your experience that you don't have the same level of ownership in terms of strategy and following through with it?
For gameplay strategy, I find it's a little bit of a negative, but overall I don't think it affects it too much because I am, even losing the game, I'm having fun with what I'm doing because of how the mechanisms integrate with the theme so well. So I have fun with just the theme itself pretty much.
Well, I mean, that's the goal of playing games.
If you're looking for winning the game, I think it does lend itself to more plays, getting better at the game, knowing what you're looking for, and pivoting when necessary. So
would you say, because a lot of this is predicated on what cards you're dealt or what cards come up, do you feel like that this is more of kind of a luck or skill-based type of game?
I think it's still more skill-based, but yeah, it's got that level of luck too. But I think probably what John's thinking over there too, and you guys have done well in all the games we've played. Mm-hmm. I think that the skill should outweigh the luck if you're playing your turns correctly. So yeah.
Yeah, weigh in on that, John.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It comes back to this idea of, if you are a smart tactical player, you should be able to pivot and make the best use of what's on the board, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, my first hand, I felt like, I was going right down this direction. I started building into it, and I was like, I have no money now, and I can do nothing until someone cranks up to the break room, and we finally get to reset. And even then, I was still sitting at like, I'm only getting $10 a turn. What am I going to do? I'm not playing animals to really build up my tickets. But I found a way to change the way I was looking at what I could do to then maybe mitigate needing that money early on. So I built up sponsorships instead, and then use that to then get me the money I needed to start throwing animals out everywhere and having a new strategy. So I think it's more skill than luck for sure in this game, and I think that's definitely positive.
Yeah, but not to cut you off, but I don't feel like that skill is such a prerequisite to this that there would be players who are just better at this game than others. Right. That what I've noticed is a lot of time you're just slapping together kind of half strategies. And if you get kind of the right sponsorship to come up, or the right type of conservation, that then you can slowly like add that in to your overall what's going on. And it's not like I have to have this engine to start out with, or I'm starting out losing, but you're just kind of throwing things together as you're going along. And that really works well for me as somebody that if I get kind of distracted or lose focus or have a hard time zeroing in on a strategy, is I know I can kind of pick things as I'm going along to just help me move forward through the game.
Yep. And that was one of the things I was just going to say real quick, is maybe more of the strategy mindset that I have with gaming. I might try to not to give it away what I'm going to do next game or anything, but I might try to do what John did this game and just maybe build up more sponsorships to happenstance land into end game scoring based on what I'm drawing, because it seems like that is more of a strategy where let's throw down some end game scoring, throw down some in-game abilities, and then try to fall into it. Whereas I think if you're going after the tiles and putting animals into there, and I want a combo with the petting zoo stuff, or I want a combo with getting all reptiles or that sort of thing, I think then all of a sudden you're left with not as many of those sponsorships or end game scoring cards by the end of the game, where if your cards didn't land with your strategy throughout most of the game or the entirety of the game, I think you're left with not any of that end game scoring like I have ended up with so often.
So that brings me to the last thing, coincidentally, that I kind of wanted to bring up was the end game scoring is when you're at the end and you have a shot to win it, the end game in terms of the conservation points at the end really swings it. Do you guys feel like that this game is too heavily skewed on end game scoring, or that it's just the right amount that going into it you still don't exactly know who's going to win? What do you think, Corey?
It's just the type of game it is. I think you have to know that there's going to be a lot of end game scoring. I think it adds kind of more of the designer side of things. If I'm thinking of it like what the designer what might have been thinking is, it might add some fun to the game because you don't necessarily know who's going to win at the end. You can't. There's not a runaway leader. There's not. Oh, hey, look how far ahead he is. Let's just end it now because we're not going to catch up. You just never know who that person is going to be for the overall winner of the game. But yeah, I mean, it could be a negative for some people because you never know what you're going to get at the end. And I'm just going to come back to that sponsorship card thing that I was talking about with John's cards. You throw some down, you see what balls land in which buckets, and then you might end up with some end game scoring that way. So it's a little bit of an.
So weigh in on that too, John.
I liked it because there was definitely a point in the game where it's like, okay, if this turn I get 5 tickets, I'm 1 ticket away from triggering that end game. But do I want to be the person that triggers that? Because now the people behind me are all going to get a turn, and maybe they can move their conservation token up further, which if they're already close to being tied with me, that could be a huge benefit to them. So it's like you also have to think about when do you want to trigger that end game. So instead, I left my token 1 ticket away, knowing that next turn I can now do another association action to get a conservation token out to gain me another 5 points on that track. So that elevated me even further than, let's just trigger that now, end this, and see what happens.
This is a game that we're really going to want to dive into more and talk about more and figure out the best way to play. So let's just kind of go into our final rating, our final review, and any recommendations we have for it. So, John, as always, kick us off.
I think the more I've talked about this game, the more I've talked myself into a higher score for it. Originally, I was thinking like 8.5. It's really long. It's heavy. But just realizing how much this last game, especially, I thought about the nuances of everything that was going on. I'm going to go with 9.5.
Wow. That's really high.
Wow.
It might be a 10 if it wasn't so long.
Well, and like I maintain, the more we play it, the less we're going to be exploring it.
Right.
So it probably will cut down on some of that time. That's only mildly shocking. When you first were telling me about this game, I didn't seem too incredibly enthused because it's, okay, you're building a zoo. And you got animals. And then when I asked you, are there otters? And you said no, then I was devastated.
And you said asked another thing, animal, and that wasn't in here.
Yeah,
either,
so it was 0 for 2.
Yep.
But then playing this there is so much going on, and the theme fits really well together. I don't feel like I get overwhelmed, but there's a plethora of decision making and strategies and combinations that are all going into it that I'm really excited about playing this game. I was looking up strategy. I was thinking about it in between our play sessions of it. That I'm definitely going to give it a 9.5 as well. Like I really enjoy this game. It is really, really fun. And there's so many different kind of back and forth things that can go with it that I'm really glad that you found this game and that we're playing it. And I think that this is a really good game for anybody to have in their gaming collection.
And if it would have had otters, he would have given it a 10.
But
instead they have Andean condors. Like, come on, guys.
Yep.
Get the otters into the expansion.
Yep.
Yeah.
10 from Talking Cardboard.
Yes, 10s across the board. I wouldn't even let you guys give an alternative opinion. It would be 10s across the board if they had otters. But yeah, so I really am enjoying all the aspects of this game, and I really hope we get to play it again soon. Finish us up.
Yeah, for me, a lot of the same positives you guys have. Obviously, I think the couple of the minor negatives don't really outweigh it too much. I think the teach is hard at first, but as people, like Jerk said earlier, as people roll into it after a couple turns, they get the hang of it. The theme really makes sense with what you're doing, with the actions you're doing. I love the conveyor belt action system. Just very neat how that works. I'm very mechanisms driven, as I've said a million times, and I think that really hits on all cylinders for me. The tile placement, everything going on with it just makes sense and is a whole lot of fun. I'm going to come in at a 9 out of 10. So 9.5 and a 9. It's just outstanding. I think, like we said too.
Why do you hate Ark Nova?
Yeah, like we've all said, if the game was a little shorter, or if they come up with an expansion that makes it a little bit shorter, I think that rating would climb. I'm not necessarily great at the game, but the sign of a good game is if I'm having fun the entire time, whether I win or lose, that is the sign of an excellent game. And this is exactly what this game does for me. Cut back on that length, it could make its way up to a 9.5 or a 10. Same thing with you guys, I'm sure. But yeah, and the artwork is take or leave it, too, for a lot of people. But it really didn't detract from it because it feels like it's taking itself more seriously than just a cartoony style game. It makes it feel like you are more going after these conservation projects and releasing animals into the wild, and you're actually really doing a good thing with your park. So yeah, 9 out of 10.
Wow. So from all of us here at Talking Cardboard, this is definitely some game you should check out. You should see if your group can get a hold of a copy, because we definitely love Ark Nova.